Hey, good people. Grits or cream of wheat? Who the hell is racist? Does anyone ever ask if they touch your hair?
Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex Gee, a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. Gee.
Black Like Me.
Hey, good people. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex Gee. I'm so excited about today's segment that I added an extra hey into that intro. And I'll let you know why I'm so excited. I'll get back to that in just a moment. But let me just say this. Patreon folks, my Patreon family, thank you for supporting this work because I love doing this. Each week, we're having new people who are downloading. We're having folks all across the country. We're being listened to in all 50 states. And now people are downloading all around the world. One day we had 100 downloads between France and India. So I don't know how people are finding out about it, but they're getting the word out, and I'm just glad about it. So folks are black like me everywhere, or wanting to be black like me everywhere. So the Patreon family, thank you for your support. And for others, please know no amount is too small. So click inside the notes section, go to Patreon. We have all these wonderful levels. Help us continue to do great work and to bring this great programming and these great discussions and conversations to more and more people. So please do that. I think that would be really, really important. There are some of you who may not know this, but if you go to my website, alexgee.com, you can sign up to be reminded on a weekly basis about new things that I have dropped. The podcast is just one method of communicating, but do you know that I've created something that's called Geeisms, which are pithy sayings that can give you energy for the day. I call it a jolt for your soul, or for your mind, or for your heart, but really insightful things. Sometimes I reread them and think, dang, did I write that? That is really good. I'm gonna have to trademark and copyright some of this stuff. I'm also blogging more because I realize that I love to communicate through public speaking and speeches, but I think that I'm more insightful when I write because I have fewer filters. I'm not reading body language. So between my Geeisms, my photos, my podcast, you won't miss anything if you go to alexgee.com and just subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. We don't push you and pressure you for money. It's just you will get a notice every Wednesday morning saying, hey, I just dropped something or created something that I thought you would find interesting. So please do that. I recently went to Ghana, and Ghana has messed me up. Being in West Africa, being in that environment has just been powerful. If you've been following the journey, you'll just understand that this is part of the year of return. 1619 was the start of the transatlantic slave trade, and the National NAACP organized a trip, and about 250 of us went back to the motherland to just draw from her resilience and to just say we're okay. We just, we came back just to say we appreciate what you've invested in us and instilled in us, Africa, and to gain an even greater sense of pride by being of African descent because we got a chance to see and understand where we were from. Just beautiful. So today I have my sister in the studio. She was with me when I was there. I was there with my wife, and I was there with my daughter, my sister as well, and we had a tremendous trip. And so I want to process it a little bit more. I want to process it differently than I did when I was there one-on-one. And so Lilada, she's a podcaster in her own right. She's an artist. In fact, she's multitasking. She's actually creating art right now. She's talking to me. She's like those people who do needlepoint in community meetings, except she's not crossing her legs and wearing wool socks. And
but I'm wearing Birkenstocks.
And Birkenstocks. We are from Wisconsin,
yeah.
But she's here. She wears so many hats. She's a trainer. She's a consultant for race relations. She's been a licensed social worker, a counselor, an ordained pastor, and just an entrepreneur. Just wears so many hats. But today we're gonna just talk as brother and sister about the trip and its implications. Miss Lilada, welcome to Black Like Me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, so listen, are you still dealing with jet lag? Like I've been waking up, you wake up early anyway, but I've been waking up a little extra early and falling to sleep a little earlier. Has your sleep been off since the trip?
Yeah, a little bit. I've been definitely ready to go to bed by about 5 or 6 o'clock.
In the evening?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I don't always go to sleep that time, but if I were allotted to,
Sure.
had access to my bed at 5 o'clock.
Wow.
Bye.
I'm going to make sure that my team takes a photo of us because this shirt, this print that you brought back is just brilliant.
Thank you.
And so, we're going to get into the deeper sides of the trip to Ghana, but just how did you find the shopping?
Oh, God. I love the shopping. I didn't know where to start, and I didn't want to overspend and just buy random things. So I was pretty direct in the things that I knew I was looking for, but the shopping was magnificent. I think the beads and the materials were my favorite things to bring back.
Really?
Yeah. And coffee.
And coffee. You know what's really funny? We both were raised by Shopaholic.
Yeah, we were.
And so you and I grew up on garage sales. We've been in Madison almost 50 years. Farmers market, estate sales.
Right.
That's all part of
Shopping off season.
shopping off seasons. Exactly. I tell people, I remember being in the mall and kind of got separated from you and Mom. I could tell where Mom was by the sound she made of the hangers as she moved them across the rack. There's a cadence that
Alex,
she had.
You
and I was
are
like,
telling the truth.
my mom is right over there
I
in
just
the
heard
missus.
it in my
You just heard in your
ear,
head?
in my mind's
right.
eye.
Because some
Yes,
people just sort of had this
mind's ear.
slow, deliberate, but there was just sort of,
Skew, skew, skew.
Mom taught us how to hide clothes. So like, Mom was always sort of a healthy size. She was,
What are you trying to say?
She was full figured.
Wow.
And beautiful woman.
Uh-huh.
She was slim after having me, but she had gained a lot of weight with you.
Wow.
And so Mom would take stuff like from her rack, like, for like whatever size she wore, and go put it in Missy's petites or juniors so she could know where it was after payday.
My God.
That's how a shopaholic rolls.
Wow.
And so, you know what, when I grew up, and if I saw something I liked, and I was like, I can't get this week, I'd go put it in. I go put it in like, 30 regular, 30, 30 short or something so I can come back and find it. You
That's
know what?
crazy.
It works. It just works. So parents, just know your children are watching. But
Right.
I want to make sure our team gets a shot of you because I love that print. It's
Thank you.
it's really beautiful. So Lilada, we're back. We're settling in. And you know what? We've turned into those people we used to make fun of. People would go to Africa and they'd come back with different
dashikis.
hairstyles, wearing dashikis,
Right.
wearing beads.
Right.
And lo and behold, if you and I did not come back wearing African prints.
To church.
To church. To church. And, remember a couple weeks ago, we had a family reunion. I wore one of my dashikis. Did you wore one? You wore a head wrap.
I wore a head wrap and I broke up the whole family reunion.
Well, I walked in and they said, well, are you African now? I was like, well, actually, my misguided sister, we're all of African descent.
Right.
The whole world started in Africa and Mother Africa. So I said, wait, I'm turning into that guy that's trying to, that's trying to explain these things. And so I want to talk not just about the trip, but I'll give you, some place just to answer a couple of questions. But I have some things that I want to discuss with you about the implications of the slave trade, and not just focusing on the gruesomeness of it, of that itself, but just its implications on the Black family that we're still dealing with today. Because many of our listeners who are part of the Black Like Me family come here to find out information about the origins of some of the issues that we wrestle with.
Right.
And the more they understand the truth behind these issues, that they're not just conspiracy theory, it helps them to understand social constructs and things
Right.
that are really plaguing America and the world right now. So, but let me just ask you just a couple of the highlights of the trip for you. And we can start with even things that you felt good about, because we know that there's like the slave dungeon thing we may get to, but just highlights from the trip. We know we know shopping's one of them, but
Well, I think one of the biggest highlights for me was, without a doubt, seeing all of the culture that we were able to maintain
sure,
as not just Black Americans, but I'm talking about throughout the diaspora. Like, I felt like I had been to Ghana before, because it was, to me, it was so much like the Dominican Republic. It was so much like, Panama and
percent of Africans from Africa,
and
because people don't know that only about 5% of Africans from Africa came to the United States.
yeah, and
They went to South America and the Caribbean.
the first time I went to the Dominican Republic, I had a sense that somehow they maintain a different type of the African culture than we did. And so it was really underscored on this trip in terms of the music. Like if you're not listening to the words, it sounds like salsa or the reggaeton music, the food, the chicken, the beans, the rice, the plantains. I mean, that is all through Latin America.
How about the plantains?
Plantains? Oh,
Did you like those too?
okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Are plantains a thing? Or am I just pronouncing it correctly?
We'll just keep moving. We'll just keep
Fried
moving.
bananas.
Yeah, okay.
How about that?
Okay, I
you
like
feel
it.
good about that?
I feel good about it.
Wow, thank you. So, just seeing those things, I think what I saw more so for American Black culture was church traditions, like wearing white on Sundays, the way
Special Sundays too.
First Sundays,
First
Sundays, in particular, communion Sundays,
baptismal services.
Yeah.
There's still white parties that trace back to that tradition.
That's so interesting. And then also, just the way that in a sanctified church tradition we call people into ministry is very parallel to the way that to this day they call people into being chiefs and kings.
Sure.
So it was
Sort of a community approach, community discernment.
right. So that was just really wonderful to see and amazing to see that despite the transatlantic slave trade, the Middle Passage, Jim Crow, all the crap that we went through, we still, in many, many ways, have stayed true to who we are as a people.
Right. I mean, that trip makes me want to understand culture better. Like we talk about the epigenetic or sort of the cellular inheritance of pain and trauma. But the fact that we're able to maintain cultural ties to a land that no one who's living today remembers is incredible. So is culture more cellular, more molecular, more is it how are we to understand it? Because we brought a lot of that here without even
really did.
It's just like sometimes our mom will say, "Oops, for this lip."
Not really. Truth of the matter.
That's another show.
Underscore.
That's another show.
Mom's favorite.
Right. How could you be so much like your father and you weren't raised by him and you weren't around him? And so it just makes culture something that I think we've not studied or understood, or we've cheapened it. That it's just how you cook or how you dress, but it's got a deeper role in us because it's more embedded in us.
Right.
For us to go back and see things that are thousands of years old, because 400 years ago it's what folks were doing before they came to America, and then we've maintained it.
Well, like even the drums, and that's where I feel like in Latin America they have stayed true to African music. The drums is very, very key to like salsa music and various things, which many people don't realize that salsa music was actually created by somebody from the Dominican Republic in Cuba, and was very, very much tied to the African roots of music. And so when I listened to the drums when we were in Africa, I knew what to do.
What was that?
Drop it like it was hot. I mean, in my soul, I felt the need to respond, and that I knew what to do and how to move,
It was in you.
It was in me. I was fascinated by the drums.
And they met us. The drummers met us at the airport.
They did.
Our plane was the only one that came through customs at that particular time, and we were serenaded, so to speak. There were dancers and banners. Welcome home, welcome home. What did that do to you to have people not just say in the airport, "Hey, welcome to, this new land," but welcome home, welcome back home?
To be absolutely honest, I almost passed out.
Really?
I had to really maintain myself. I wanted to fall on the ground and start crying.
Wow.
It was overwhelming.
Because of the connection
Because
of that?
the connection, it was a welcome, but it was a welcome that I felt on a soul
Right.
level.
When they said it, I felt it.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you've ever seen someone who's been removed from their home or removed from something, and they just kind of faint into it.
Right.
I was that overwhelmed, but just wasn't sure if people were going to roll their luggage over me if I went down to the ground.
Wow.
Yeah, so I held on to my suitcase.
That's why you're leaning against your suitcase.
Yes.
Because you almost went down.
I almost went down.
You almost dropped it like it was hot.
Yes.
And then rolled it like it was cold.
Wow. There you go. Yeah, it was just extremely moving.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, because again, many of our listeners are non-African American. Culture in America has been built around you. It's catered to you. You didn't ask for it, but it's true. It's happened. Your presidents, with the exception of President Barack Obama, and still half of him, it was still something that you could relate to. But to be in a culture, to be in a place that felt so affirming of who we are and who we've been and where we're going, it's just really overwhelming. It's not like just going to a black coffee shop or black record shop or black bookstore. To be in the home of blackness, where it's celebrated and there's nothing dirty, negative, tainted that's associated with it. It's just, here's who we are and here's who we've been forever. You know, when we celebrate, we still play drums like we did, you know, hundreds of years ago. Maintaining that cultural vitality was amazing. That just made me very.
Vibration. You felt the vibration of the culture
and the excitement that we were back. I mean, to use a biblical sense, we were the prodigal children in some ways who went home. It's a little different. Not like we ran away from home as the youngest son did, right? But to come back, that
we were stolen,
right? We were stolen. But the fact that they're celebrating the fact that we made it, back. Not only that we could find the resources to do it, but that we desired to, and we wanted to come back, not as tourists, not because we wanted to go on some safari, but we came back because we wanted to connect with the cultural richness of Africa and celebrate that 400 years have not broken us. They knew we needed that music to really feel at home. That was powerful.
Well, they just knew what to do. But I think the other thing is I want to send a shout out to Ghana and Ghana tourism. I don't know who was the brainchild behind the Year of Return.
It was brilliant.
But it was absolutely brilliant.
Right.
It was absolutely brilliant. And it really set the stage for those of us who would not have been a part of that to be cued into this very significant historical time. And
shout out to Derek Johnson and his leadership with the National NAACP and Diallo Sombri, who leads, and his staff like Denisha and others who lead up the Adinkra group, who organized our ground travel, hotels, visits, sites that we were visiting. It was just beautiful. It was really beautiful. So Lilada, we started in Virginia, and to see where the slaves were first arrived. And that was powerful. And then the next day we flew. That was Jamestown, Virginia. Then the next day we flew and went to Jamestown, Accra. The connection of those two things, Jamestown and Jamestown, being on the very shores where Africans arrived and being where they left, was really powerful. So like within a 24-hour span, we had stood on both of those shores as black people, where we left and where we arrived. That was moving. In and of itself. And so there's a couple of things that I just, so we talked about the high points, the music, the celebration, the shopping. And we don't have to spend a lot of time here because I know we're still processing it. But the slave dungeons that are affectionately known as slave castles, standing where Africans stood, our ancestors stood. The one in Cape Coast was the largest slave dungeon in West Africa, which means the majority of folks came through there. We went to the Slave River, where slaves took their last bath before being branded, separated from their families further, being put on ships. And you're a person that feels space very, very deeply. Just any insights about what you felt standing where people had been shackled, where they had to wade in their own human feces and that of others. Slave River. And again, not sensationalizing it, because we all pull the resilience out of it, but just a snapshot of what standing in some of those places was like.
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting as being a person of slave descent is the fact that most of us in the Americas also have our oppressor in our DNA. So when I was in the slave dungeon, really I was overwhelmed by the energy of the hateful and evilness in the hearts of men that could do this to other people. I was overwhelmed by that. And later I kind of processed, like, why was that so thick to me at the time? And I was grieving. And I realized, that oppressor is in me genetically. I carry that.
Because of rape.
Because of rape.
We have white descent.
I carry that. And I grieved in that space that any human being could be carried to that depth of evil.
Sure.
there was a level of processing that I did later after being in a slave dungeon. But what was interesting is that the leader, as they were taking us on a tour, spoke when we were in front of the slave dungeon area for the women. Mm-hmm. And he pointed out, like, here's where women would be taken and, go up to the rooms of the captains and whoever else was in charge and raped. And I thought, oh my God, this is the genesis for so many of us genetically.
That's actually where I want to go.
That have been sexually assaulted, and slavery has just been built on the sexual assault of Black women, and that was the genesis.
Yes.
Of that
for Black women.
For Black women, and unfortunately for Black men, but that was a deepening of my own thought around my work.
Right. Your work of helping young Black girls recover from sexual abuse.
Right.
And
this is where this shit started.
Right.
And it wasn't until I got home and I was talking to my daughter Alexandra about being in the slave dungeon that I had a very deep experience. And I'm not one ever to talk about ancestors, ancestral spirits, things like that.
Right.
But I was telling her about the dungeon, and while I was there, I did not cry.
Right.
And at home now, 1,000 miles away, I'm crying uncontrollably, to the point she's asking me, Mom, are you okay? I think it scared her.
Right.
We talked about it a couple of days later, and as I was crying, I just kept saying, it was so horrible. It was so horrible. And she said, Mom, it was like it was another person speaking.
She said it's like you're in a trance.
Like I was in a trance. And I said, Alexandra, honest to God, I felt embodied. I felt like I was a first person who had experienced that myself and was talking from being there and like having the ability to communicate how bad it was.
Wow. And Lilada, this opens the door to sort of journey through this a little more. We're not saying that women were never raped on African soil.
Right.
But it was never systematized. It was never made to be part of warfare or how tribes or groups or communities interacted with each other.
Right.
Slavery meant rape. It meant owning a woman's body, all parts of it. It was built into it. So before she even got on a boat to go over, across the ocean, she was raped.
Right. And often her belly might be full.
Exactly.
Already.
Exactly. There are houses up around the castle there in Cape Coast where some of the Portuguese slave owners, slave traders would put African women who had babies with Portuguese men because they didn't want them to go back to Portugal. They want them to go back to America. So they set them up right there. So we know that they were raping them. And even though Ancestry.com and others try to clean it up, this was not consensual. This was with fear. This is with weapons. And so
they didn't even speak your damn language.
Right,
so,
right. So so we're
how
not
could
dating.
You get consent?
Right. How could you? Right. Exactly.
Right.
So I want to say to the folks who are thinking about this or who are wanting to think about this or romanticize, you all, this is not what happened. You do not have strangers break into your house and then take over your home, that all of a sudden your daughter has a sort of Stockholmish kind of relationship with someone. And I think I want to have babies with him. He treats me well. This was tremendous. This was tremendously painful. Traumatic is what I was really trying to say. And we felt almost haunted in those spaces later to think about what, again, what it took to endure it and what it took to inflict it. I wrote this piece. If you go to AlexGee.com, you can find it under my blog section, but it's called No Stockholm Syndrome Here. But in it, I said, we fought in wars and freed ourselves. You fought in wars and further enslaved yourselves. You got to be enslaved to inflict that kind of shit on people. To do that,
something's wrong.
Something is wrong to be able to, to do that. Did I cut you off? Were you about to say something?
No. I absolutely agree, and I think I've gone to plantations before in New Orleans.
Sure.
Now I want to go more, but the energy I felt there, and I felt the ancestors there. Sure. I certainly did, but it's different because on a plantation, you're dealing with people whose grandparents were slaves, their mamas were slaves, they were slaves, their child was going to be a slave. So it was a certain level of understanding of the systematology.
You were born
of
into
slavery.
that.
You were born into a slave mentality. You understood the language. It was different. It was horrible, but it was a different horror.
Right.
But the energies that I encountered in these spaces in Africa house the horror of being snatched from your home, from your family, from your country,
From your parents.
from your children. You know, the horror of that initial, you know,
Right.
and not knowing,
Right.
like slavery.
You knew.
Plantation, you knew day to day, you're going to pick the cotton, you're going to do this,
Right.
blah, blah, blah.
You hated it, but you knew.
hated it, but you knew it was predictable.
In West Africa.
But they didn't know from 1 second to the next what was going to be the next horrific experience.
Because some of them were marched up to 300 miles being
Right.
trained and all of these things.
Some of them had never seen white people before.
Right.
They didn't understand the language. They didn't know what
So for
was going
all
on.
intents and purposes, Martians had invaded.
Might as well have been.
So this is where I wanted to take our folks, particularly our white folks who want to be allies, to understand this. And so, Lilada, put your counselor hat on for just a moment, because you've done it. You're
But I
counselor,
just
social
did my
worker.
hair this morning. I don't want to mess up.
Okay, all right, got you. But you got your counselor.
I'll hold
hat
my
on.
counselor hat.
Okay, what happens in the life of a person who does not know what's happening from moment to moment? Add to that, you're snatched from your family. I mean,
Right.
you talk to people who have been in the middle of fights with their parents, or have run away from home, or been taken from home. I mean, so from moment to moment, you don't know what's going on. You've been
Right.
snatched. Then you got the physical trauma. Then this is your life's work of sexual abuse and trauma repeatedly.
Right.
And many of these folks were either children, they were young girls, or they were married.
Right.
They were women. Then you have the trauma of putting them on a boat and stacked like cargo.
Right.
I mean, let's just talk about any one of those could make a person your client for the rest of their lives. But the impact of all of those traumatic experiences, I don't even know how to calculate it.
Well, you calculate it by what we see today.
Okay.
Where black women are at the top of issues like every stress-related disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease,
Dementia?
obesity, which are precursors to Alzheimer's.
Right.
So you look at today what we physically are still holding on to in our bodies. And, you know, I would tell you that people who experience trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma like that, they leave their bodies.
What do you mean?
They dissociate. You have to go to some alternative
If you're gonna
reality to survive that. And, you know, we talk about, often in therapy, you talk about grounding. You know, because when you have trauma, it's like your spirit jumps out your body.
Right. Which is, some would even define, death as that.
Yeah, it's like your spirit literally jumps out of your body. And
In order to stay
survive
sane
it.
or survive.
Right, even maintain a little sanity. I don't even know if you can stay sane. So grounding back is what often is done in therapy with folks who
Wow.
have experienced trauma. Being present, mindfulness, watching your breath, all of these things
It's part of grounding.
is part of that grounding, And so they had to have left their bodies. And also understand that
Oh my gosh.
even them being next to the next black person, oftentimes that next black person they were next to did not speak their language either.
Right, because Africa is not a
No.
country.
So I met a man yesterday from
It's a
Ethiopia,
continent. Mm-hmm.
one country on the continent of Africa. He said there are 70 different languages in Ethiopia.
Right.
So they're mixing all of these people, some of which were actually enemies.
Right.
So you had to have a lot of shit that's going on.
Right.
And the easiest thing to deal with shit that won't stop is just leave.
So the people who couldn't do that emotionally were some of those who jumped overboard.
Right.
As I said in one of the poems I wrote, I think the one called Welcome Home, they jump to safety. They'd rather deal with the treacherous Atlantic waters and
Right.
shark-infested waters than to stay in that space. And so these
Right.
women and men and children arrive depressed.
Can I speak to that for a moment? Now, I
Sure.
have to do my own research on this, but my understanding is that the population of sharks increased because of the transatlantic slave trade.
Because they
Because there
knew
were
the
so many
pattern.
people who were thrown overboard. They were fed and they bred, and the population of sharks grew. That's some bullshit.
That's crazy. People, yeah.
So you could have a bigger house, so your fucking cotton could be picked. So you could live high in the house, so you could pretend like you were royalty. Because I think that's what's one of the issues with a lot of the English that came over. Because, you had to be born into royalty. But over here, you could come and you could have these slaves and you could act like you were high on the manor. That's some bullshit.
Wow. And not on this show, but we have to even talk about how modern day missions, evangelical missions.
Y'all,
Well, we're going to come back to that.
Okay.
Yeah, but talk about how
because I'm ready to cuss out a few missionaries who
Right.
talk about they serving the Lord over
Right.
there, and
And
you got living high in the hall, gotten servants doing everything for
Right.
you, the
Right.
devil,
Right, calling them houseboys.
of the devil.
Yes, yeah. So here's something I want to talk about as well. So people are always trying to dissect the black community and what's wrong with it. And you know this story. I might have even said this before, but it bears repeating. Our mom went back to college with us. The three of us were in college together in the Afro-American Histories department, had the same advisor. But I remember one time when they were talking about the atrocities of slavery, Mom raised her hand and said, "Enough. Tell me about the mindset of white people that would do this." And so
We don't want to talk about that.
Right. We don't want to talk about that. And let me just to be honest, just to bring this up with you again, the professor seemed stumped. He didn't seem angry, or he just seemed stumped like that's not what he studied. So you
Right.
studied brutality to black people, but not who brutalized black people.
I am tired of white professors teaching black history.
Right. And so, so here's what I'm thinking about. So you have these men like the Portuguese who are raping women and then putting them up in housing right next to the slave castles. So I mean, just imagine that you're a kid looking somewhat like the folks that are being chained, trapped, beaten, but you're living on this side of the gate. So
Right.
all of that stuff that's going on. But so where did fatherlessness begin? I mean, so when you think about, these white men raped black women. If they resisted, they beat black women. Again, not only were they daughters, but they were wives, which means they were breaking up families and breaking up homes, and not just on the west coast of Africa, but across come on, you're riding for 3 months out there on the boat
Right.
or however long. So then you land in America, and then slave owners. Now I don't know how. So they're continuing like whatever they were doing over there on the west coast. They're doing it. They're raping.
You nasty ass.
Right, we're doing stuff for your children. And then folks are going to sit up, get sociology degrees, and then talk about what's wrong with the black, talk
Right.
about what's wrong with the black family,
Right.
and not even address what's wrong with the white man,
Right.
who would have children, father children, beat children, sell children,
Right.
not raise children, and then go to church and preach or be a deacon or be a leader or be a trustee.
Right.
We're not talking about all of those influences. And again, you and I went to Africa and came back drawing on the strength and the resilience. And so
Right.
we're not here to be pitiful. Right now, we're just being truthful. We made it. We stood. We understood the circumstances, and we worked to free ourselves and continue to free ourselves from the ramifications of that system. White people don't know that they're enslaved in that, or don't care that they're
Right.
entrapped in that. But that whole thing about breaking up families and stuff started with white slave owners, white capitalists, white people wanting to get rich and wealthy and to live high on the hog, like the royalty in Europe. But that brokenness, that rape, that broken homes, that started with the white power structure, and they just trace it back to the black men being lazy and shiftless, or the black woman being busy and strong and not wanting to work with her husband. They're putting it all back on us and not talk about what you said, the whole introduction of rape culture. I mean, this is something you said, so I'm not going to pretend like I'm even being insightful, but you made a statement about, when we did a Facebook Live, about where you think rape culture came from.
I think it directly came from slavery. When
How
you
so?
have white men who can have the white women that they want, and then at the same time have any black woman that they want when they want, black woman, black child, their sons were watching.
Of course they were.
And they learned that they could have any black woman that they wanted. And then their sons were watching. And then the mindset around consent wasn't even a thing.
Like the chattel property. What do you mean consent? Am I going to ask my horse?
Right.
Can I ride you? Am I going to ask my cow, Bessie, can I milk you today?
The consent was not a thing. And so when you bring down the whole idea of thought around sex, that is, you can have it when you want it, that is, to me, the foundation
of rape culture.
in America.
That's powerful. Lily, I've never heard anybody else say that like that.
Neither have I.
See, that's profound. And because of your work with rape and abuse. And so stop talking about it like there's something wrong in the Black family.
Right. The thing that's wrong in the Black family is that white people ever got involved with our families. That's what's wrong with the Black family.
That's true. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this segment of Black Like Me. I want to take this moment to tell you about something new that we're adding to the Black Like Me experience. I've added a Patreon page. Yeah, that's right. Patreon.com/BlackLikeMe. It allows me to really connect with the listeners more. As I've been traveling the last few months, I am meeting so many strangers who are telling me how this show is having an impact not only on their personal perspectives and lives, but their professional lives. And that means a lot to me. So we've created a number of tiers, and I think you'll like this. Cream of wheat, grits with salt level, grits with sugar, grits with shrimp and cheese, a black icebreaker level. They give folks a variety of choices depending upon what you can afford. But what it allows me to do, depending on the level, where I will shout out your name on one of the shows. Another level allows us to have quarterly interactions on a private Facebook page. And there's another level that allows me to FaceTime with listeners individually to talk to you about what's going on in my world and in the studio and what's coming up. It's really exciting. We've been able to offer a great show to you for the past 2 years, and we want to maintain that level of professionalism while adding a few new things that I can't quite tell you yet. But please go to patreon.com/BlackLikeMe and help us take this show to another level. When we were over in Africa, I remember one of our tour guides said, look at the folks out here. They're selling, they're proud, they're entrepreneurial. Mm-hmm. And one gentleman said, they're not poor because they eat every day. And whatever it is they want, they can grow. They weren't walking around
or get out of the ocean.
Get out of the ocean or catch it. And we saw people. You and I walked through what's called the fishing village, right near Jameson.
One of the poorest communities I've ever
seen. But yet grandmas were sitting there shelling shrimp or some type of seafood, preparing it either to sell or to cook. Kids are jumping rope, but they were all in the same situation, just like folks growing up in subsidized housing or in struggling communities didn't really know we were poor or struggling or on welfare. We just thought it was cool. We got free lunch. Like, oh, I don't have to bring money to school. But when you're with others who are doing it, you don't feel like I'm deprived. And so you're right. That interaction, that intersection, like, oh, you shouldn't eat that. Oh, you shouldn't wear that. Oh, you shouldn't pray like that. They impose their European values or thoughts or ignorant, whatever it is, ethos into what we were doing. But who traces it back to that? And when we say that, and we're intelligent, we're educated, we've studied these issues. You and I, not only have we studied it, we've practiced this kind of work. We have the authority to speak into these issues. And so when ignorant folks speak into the situation about why we are always talking about slavery and not looking at the root causes of it, we're not trying to shift blame as if it rests upon us, because what we're seeing here was not our culture in West Africa. It's not what people were walking around doing. They weren't walking around just beating women, beating children, young people, attacking adults. We learned
beating from white people.
Rape, beating, all of that, colorization.
We learned that from white people.
The Portuguese were putting their biracial children in houses, but selling the black children to America. They were making the difference. Why do you have this thing about hair? Why do you have this thing about culture? I'm glad we know history because it allows us to shut a lot of that ignorant shit up. Right. Because y'all talking to somebody who we know.
I'm not the one.
We're not the one.
No.
And so to have studied this, it's just important for us to know. And I'm bringing this up because many of my listeners are allies or would-be allies. We want you to know how we got here. So when people begin to talk to you about what's going on, we got to know this. A gentleman, walked up to me today and said, "Hey, I want to. He's a podcast host. I want to talk to you about your work with disenfranchised black children, poor black children." And my assistant Tyler was sitting there. He said, "Well, why would you just assume that we only work And Tyler's white. Why would you just assume we only work with at-risk folks? He goes, well, you don't? And I said, well, we also work with white people who are creating artificial barriers for success of black folks, because I don't believe that just working with at-risk black folks is going to make them successful. I said, there are a couple of things that's wrong with that's hindering black people, how we see ourselves, and white people.
And how we see ourselves is based on how white people, the system that they set up and the shit they did.
Because in Ghana, folks weren't walking around like that. They were walking with their heads held high. No. They were dealing with the colonization, and the presence of these things that are called castles. I mean, you actually had government system set there while the British were protecting themselves from the Portuguese or from the Danes or whomever was fighting over West Africa at that time. So many things were introduced into the culture
that weren't part of our thought.
We're not part of our thought and our culture.
But one of the things, I had gone on this intensive civil rights weekend, right?
Sure.
And I came back.
Was it like a bus tour or something?
It was a bus tour. We went to all the major
down in the South
civil rights things down south. And I came back, and during our debrief, I basically said to the white people on the trip, I said, listen, we don't need another white tutor. We don't need another white mentor. I need you white people to figure out how you keep raising white kids who continue this system of oppression. That's your work.
How'd they look at you when you said that?
I'm tired of white people getting their hands on our kids. I'm tired of it because they're infiltrating their mindset to keep that same slave mentality going on. It's not helpful.
Self-pity, we need to hand out stuff to you.
Right. Because if you are trying to tutor my child, but your child grows up and still is oppressing, you've missed your work.
Right, because someone missed those men down in South Carolina with those torches talking about blood and soil. Someone just assumed they're just good boys. Those
not
men
even that extreme.
Sure.
I'm talking about mid-America. I'm talking about liberal white Americans.
You're talking about politicians, business owners, professors who grow up
the
saying
liberal,
stuff.
the woke white people who keep raising white kids to keep oppression going.
Eric Washington Jr. was on my podcast recently saying that in 4th grade, white kids are saying, well, don't all lives matter? Like, they're hearing that conversation someplace, but they're not hearing the part about brutality.
And they come to school using the N-word in grade school. Now, you don't grow up. White people grow up with a lot of things, but you don't just grow up knowing that word unless you heard the word. Right. So I think it's important to understand, even as a black person, that our salvation is in ourselves.
That we got to build up.
We got to do stuff ourselves. I'm not saying that we don't need allies, and there's a lot of things that allies can do, but mostly what allies can do is give us the resources and the space to do our work. Because every time...
While doing their work as well.
While doing their work, because every time we get our kids in a situation where they are being indoctrinated in school is the place that keeps minds small. Black minds small and white minds large, and repeatedly showing them in books and as the heroes.
Where did we first learn about slavery? School.
School.
That wasn't at home. It was not at church. It wasn't on Looney Tunes.
And a little white girl walked up to me during recess and said, you should be thankful to me. I'm like, why? Because we freed you from slavery. Now, she could only draw down that conclusion by the way it was taught.
Right, because I'm sure her parents were not talking about slavery at home in 1970. No. She assumed... It was taught that some bad people did it, but a group of good white people freed them. Because they didn't teach about black people being considered contraband of war, escaping to the north to be able to fight. Right. So this history is not just for us because we know it. We've been knowing it, but it's for the folks who want to be allies. So, Lilada, you're saying to the white folks who are listening, do your work. It's actually why
do your work. And don't come to me talking about all levels of society had slaves. Don't say that to me. Not after I hadn't been to Ghana.
Right.
Because I'm gonna talk about your mama.
Right. Because it was not based on race. It was not the same. It was not brutal.
It wasn't lifelong. It wasn't your child wasn't born into it.
You weren't breeding and beating and raping to beat people into submission. I was talking with a person recently, connected with what I would consider a white liberal movement or organization, and they were saying, I'm sorry that I always bring up race with you, but when I see someone black, I want to talk about race. And I said, well, because I'm thinking about the quote you're saying. Well, really, what you need to do is spend time talking to white people. And they said, well, I had this experience, and the N-word was being used in this play, and I wanted to ask the only black person there how they felt about it. And
how did you feel about it?
And I said, how'd you feel? I said, you should ask your white friends, why do white people feel so comfortable saying it? And they said, my white friends don't use the N-word.
Sure,
and I said, you used it. You said it in front of me. So why they don't think you use it either, but you do.
Right. I try to tell people, don't listen. Don't say the N-word to me. Don't use it in a sentence. Don't use it in a story.
Don't use it in a lyric.
Don't sing it in a song. Don't write it down on a piece of paper and slide it across the table to me.
And don't think it too hard, because you're doing. Don't think it too hard.
Right.
But it's interesting. You wanted to ask a black man how he felt about hearing the word, but you said the word in front of me.
So let's take it like this. Right.
You didn't ask me. You didn't ask me how I felt.
Look.
And they were called on it, but it's very interesting.
Right.
150 people in a playhouse. You want to ask the one black person how they felt about hearing it, but you don't want to bring it up to your white friends because my friends don't.
They don't use it.
They don't use the
well,
word.
Who the hell is using it?
Who's using it?
Right.
Because I said Trump ain't using it because he don't have to.
Honey, please.
He don't have, his actions is saying it. But I'm saying there's some people that's just too smart. They don't have to say it, because what's happening is, I've heard people say it to me, I think the more we say it and the more we use it, we take the power away. Only a person who's lived in privilege and power would think that saying a word that I said,
I don't think anybody should say it. Because if I can't say it,
that's privilege.
No one should say it.
Because you think it's a
you ain't
horrible.
Gonna tell me what I can say.
Right. That's what you.
I can say.
That's what you're not gonna do.
Okay.
But the fact is that we're still having that kind of conversation. So I'm saying to folks that want to be the allies, you want to change something. The allies, listen, lean into this. Lean into your smartphone, wherever you listen to this on, because we're trying to help you understand some of the big stuff that you move into. You want to understand race relations. Get your white friends, your folks that help to vote Trump in. Talk to your white female evangelical cousins, sisters, mamas, aunties, babysitters, professors, and ask them that question. But stop running to black people to ask them stuff to get their black perspective on stuff. Get your shit together. Talk about this stuff with your friends.
But listen to this. So imagine that a woman was raped. And you're watching a movie or TV show or whatever, issue of rape comes up. And so you walk to her and say, hey, I just want to know how you feel about that rape being brought up. Does this make you think about when you were raped? What were you wearing? We would think that would be ridiculous.
And inappropriate.
Inappropriate and traumatizing. White people, we don't always want to talk about race with you when you're ready to talk. If I bring it up, you let me bring it up. I don't want to. So I'm at church. And so now we're going to, our church was traditionally black. Our church is becoming more diverse, right? I go to church because I want to talk to Jesus. Okay? I don't go to church because I want to talk about race issues, all that kind of stuff like that. And so even now, like, that church is the space where I could go and just leave all the shit behind that I've had to deal with all week. Now white people come
including
into the church.
Your potty mouth.
Oh, shit.
Well, damn.
Now white people come to church, and I got pulled aside to this little conversation Sunday after church. And you know what? I didn't come here for that. I came here to be lifted up just like you did.
So you got to figure out.
Call me on Monday morning. Shit.
Right.
I don't want to have a 45-minute conversation with you about shit I never want to talk about. And so as white people are coming into our space, don't think just because you want to deal with shit, I want to deal with shit. Don't imagine that I want to talk about my rape, the worst thing that's happened to me, what has oppressed me. Anytime you feel like talking about it,
because you, and then what are you going to do with it? Are you going to speak up against it? Are you going to talk to rapists in your family?
Right.
Are you going to acknowledge your own rape?
Right.
So do you just want to be a voyeur and talk to me about my situation, and good and well what your brother, your uncle, your coach did with you?
Exactly.
So that's something.
Respect the space you in.
Right.
Shit.
Right. And get to know people first, because the first things that I want to talk about is not race.
And talk to me about business Monday through Friday. But not at church. I don't want to do that. I don't want to get into that. And so as we're seeing more space being shifted and changed and shared,
we got to respect it.
You got to respect the space.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because that's my escapism.
Sure. So when people say, well, where else am I going to meet people? You build relationships.
Right.
You build meaningful
Now,
relationships.
she could have asked me out for a drink on Monday night.
And then talked about
and
it.
then talked about it.
Then she get the real deal. She get the unfiltered.
Okay.
So no,
now
that's
imagine me with some margarita.
No, I just can't.
My God.
I'm going to make sure I put extra holy water on you on Sundays.
Okay.
Before you go. But no, that's very important because people are looking, they're listening, they're coming to Black Like Me to understand some of these things. And so watch, learn, and observe, because sometimes what happens is I think people want to talk about it to prove that they're woke,
Right.
which just shows us that they're sleepwalking.
Exactly.
Because like this is not the time. What movie was
Right.
that when that guy said this is not the time nor the place?
Right.
Did you want to have that space? Let's focus on what we have in common. So the lady, what I'm hearing from you is, particularly with your therapist hat on, your counseling hat on, the continuous rape before the ship, the traumatic experience, being seasick. We've been on cruises, being seasick. You know that these weren't Carnival cruise line. I mean, these weren't secure stuff. This was meant for cargo. With all those things that have happened, we still draw the resilience. Remember what they said to us when we were in Africa? Yeah, let's go to the resilience part. They said, you are the survivors of the strongest of the strong. Mm-hmm. So not only did they say welcome back home, but they knew who we were. Right. Because we've only been told about what happened to our people. We've only been told that we were slaves and all of these things. But to have our ancestors, to have people from West Africa say to us, you are the survivors of the strongest of the strong. Like our parents and grandparents were astronauts and explorers and things like that. That was affirming, because I'm not used to my reality being couched in that reality by Africans, because Africans and African Americans have not had meaningful discussions around this. That was also the subtext of that discussion. Black people from the diaspora, but Africans and African Americans talking about our history and our family and our lineage from two different sides of the ocean was extremely powerful, which is why when the African visiting scholars were in Wisconsin this summer, I wanted time alone with African folks to talk about this.
And your woke white people went.
And my woke white people just, they were aghast that we wanted that kind of time and space. But back to the strong and resilient Black people. Do you remember what you felt like, or what ran through your head when we were reminded you all are survivors? Remember when we went into the dungeon, were you at that part of the tour with me? And they put this white murky mixture on our arms and said, this is a symbolism of being victorious, that we have returned and we are victorious. But to be told in a dungeon, not only where we're from, but to be reminded that we are the seed of those who survived, that was a major paradigmic shift in my head.
Well, part of it is the unpacking of Christianity, and that's a whole long conversation that I won't go into right now. But when that man did that, there was kind of like this, oh, is this evil? Like, what is this? That way you've been socialized that Africa was evil. African religion was evil. It was anti-God. It was paganistic. And so even just that kind of like, for a minute.
But raping 11-year-old girls on the ship by Christian leaders. And again, we're not talking about Jesus. Don't mess with Jesus. Okay. We're talking about what people have done, have exploited in his name. Like in my poem I wrote, I said, white colonizer, we knew that it was not beneath you to rape married women and young girls, but you stooped to a new low when you raped the gospel and created bastard children called white privilege and American exceptionalism.
Okay, and evangelical. So, so that was a special moment for me, because I am backing away from the thought and idea that African religion was evil and that white people introduced us to God.
Right.
I denounce that.
Well, okay, let's just talk about that for just a minute. But didn't we still see white Jesuses on the bus? Like, did you see those images of white Jesus? Like, we're over in Ghana. Someone actually wrote this on my Facebook page and said, what's the role of white Christianity on the community? But on those buses, there were scriptures.
But understand, though, that these people were colonized after slavery, right? So that mind fuck was still going on by white people. white Christian people.
Right. Wow.
And so in that moment and in that space when we did that ceremony, for me, it was a reckoning for me as a person of African descent.
That moment in that place, that felt sacred and special.
Yes,
When you wiped that on,
and we didn't wash that off.
right? We
Kept that on all day.
You know what? I got to tell you this, and I can process this theologically later.
Yeah.
But it was almost like it felt the same level of holiness.
Yes.
Of somebody putting a cross on your forehead. And again, we're ministers of the gospel,
Right.
Jesus Christ. But there's
I
also
can't understand it all.
But there's an introduction of a system of oppression.
Yes.
Because they use Christianity
Yes,
to
they
further
did.
and to do this stuff.
Right.
On a whole spiritual level.
Right.
But when that man wiped that on my, it's like Ash Wednesday.
Yes.
People walk around with ash on their forehead because
Right.
they're making a statement.
Right.
Or olive oil is slippery and it's oily, but it's not like we wipe it off our heads as soon as it comes on us on a Sunday. But the message was victory, and isn't that what communion is about? Isn't that about? Don't we want to pronounce a sense of victory that we have received? But we said this is a sign of victory after being told that we are the descendants of the strongest of the strong.
Right.
I came back saying I feel bubble wrapped.
A godless people could not have survived.
Come on now.
A godless people.
Who else could bring you through that?
Have survived.
Right, because where were the therapists on those boats?
Right.
Overboard,
Exactly.
Oprah and people. So what kept you from jumping overboard,
Right.
having babies, continually being raped? That's a good point. One of the things that Dr. Christy Clark Pajara says in our U.S. Black History course, we call it U.S. History for a New Day. She says, defeated people don't create or maintain culture.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add to what you said, that a godless people don't survive the Middle Passage and the transatlantic slave trade and are still not anti-God and still have this sense of openness. That means who taught who about faith.
Right.
And again, I keep quoting these poems because they're very prolific. But in one of the lines I wrote in there, because the reason I say that, Lilada, because we're both writers, we're artists.
Yes, you are, Alex. You're prolific.
But things come out and they're really passing through us. I mean, since we're talking on a spiritual level, it's not like I sit down and say, well, let me just be crafty. Sometimes things come through.
But no, your writing is brilliant.
Well, thank you, Lilada. I appreciate that, particularly coming from you, because I love how you write and create.
Thank you.
But in it, I said one line. I was talking, because I'm writing like this in this historic voice to the white controllers, the colonizers, the white people pushing their colonial Jesus, their colonial religion on people. I said, you talked about God. We talked to God.
Come on now.
And vice versa.
Come on.
And vice versa.
Come on. Yes.
Who told us not to jump over that ship? Who told us to hold out? Who told us? Because if the people even on American soil didn't hold out, what examples would we have of the resilience? Because we can't just jump to Africa. Being the strongest of the strong is not just through the lens of who left their shores, but who survived on ours, who survived on our shores. And so my work now is telling white folks this is the systemic reality that even after almost a half millennium, what's singular? Millennium, plural is millennia.
Plantain.
Yeah. After 500 years, we're still here strong, sitting in your White House, sitting in the Oval Offices, sitting in boardrooms, running universities, going out of space.
Right.
With all the stuff we had, where would we be in the world?
We caught up pretty fast.
Right. And so in just a couple of 100 years. So what that means is we need to understand.
Yeah.
That's what we need to tell. We need to
Even less than that, Alex. When you think about the fact, for us, we are the first generation of non-cotton pickers for a living.
For 400 years.
For 400 years, you and I are the first generation.
Right.
Our mother and our father pick cotton for a living.
And their parents pick cotton for a living.
But I'm just saying the fact that they pick cotton for a living.
Right.
We are the next generation post-slavery because sharecropping was nothing but slavery.
Nothing but slavery.
Okay? And look how far we've caught up.
In just our life.
In 20 years.
Right.
You know what? In a generation, how fast we've caught up. That's why they're scared. That's why they want to keep fucking with our minds and with our kids and miseducating them and misdiagnosing them. That's why they want to keep taking our kids and put them in white homes so their minds can be further fucked and their identity can be further taken away.
Wow, you sound like Angela Davis over there, and you got your black glasses down and your dashiki and stuff.
All right, now,
but here's the thing. If you, let me just say to folks, and not that I'm saying this to cater to you, but I just want to help to open your mind further. If you want to be an ally, you got to understand truth. This is not about getting all down in your in your feeling. Because let me
Right.
tell you what the white men in South Carolina were saying with their tiki torches. Our country's been taken away from us.
Right.
So 55 years of civil rights.
Right. The one you stole was taken
Right,
away.
right. Voter Registration Act is like what in 64 and all
In
those
my
other kinds of
lifetime.
things in our lifetime. So in 50 or 60 years, this country that you stole is stolen from you.
Right.
But when we talk about having been in West Africa and the Middle
Right.
Passage, well, why do we always go back to slavery? Why does
Right.
it? Why do we always have to look back? But yet you all talk about what happened in certain administrations. So I'm
Right.
saying if you're really going to be an ally,
Right.
you got to be changed because you're
Okay.
not going to change me because
Right.
I know history. I've been to the shores. I've seen it. But if you're going to really be helpful, whether you want to be more woke with your white friends, your white friends or your black children or folks you've adopted or people you built relationship with, you got to understand how we got here.
Right. And can I just say, I will never fucking forgive white people for slavery. Never. I will never forget it. I will forget it and I won't forgive it. Never. Unless God come and do something else new in my heart, I will never forget it. I will never stop talking about it. I will never stop understanding the impact that it has had on us. Never. Never. So don't even ask me to forget it because I won't. And I want to make sure you don't forget it because you're still held accountable. So even like when you're looking at social services, what I call plantation social services, where white people, predominantly white women, are benefiting financially from the peril of black people,
What do you mean?
predominantly. Well, you look at when I was a social worker some 20 years ago, I think it was 2 years that a parent was given that had any kind of abuse or neglect. They had like 2 years to get their stuff together, right? Before the parental rights would be forcibly terminated. Now I believe it's 6 months.
Wow.
Okay. And so you have a system where if you would go through most social services, I can speak for Wisconsin because I've been throughout the state.
Sure.
Most social services, domestic violence, sexual assault, human services, CPS workers are white women. They are supervised by white women, predominantly serving in the stress situations, black women. Most of which that I personally have spoken to don't have a black friend.
Wow.
So I'm asking these white women in Milwaukee, these social workers, if you don't have a black woman friend and all your clients are traumatized, poor black women, how do you know what a healthy baseline is? Whatever is in your damn mind, because you don't have a Shaquita like me telling you, bitch, you crazy. You know, you off on that. Everybody need a strong black woman friend, okay?
Yes.
And so you have a situation where white people are making up in their own damn minds because they don't even know us. They sure as hell don't love us, but they're making up in their own damn minds of what they think black families need, black children need. And based on these things, they are snatching our children from their homes under the guise of who are in protection of services. Under the guise of this, most of these children are going into the foster care system out in white communities, out in white homes, who also don't have black friends. They're being adopted out. I have seen just some horror stories. And white women are building their livelihood on this. The houses that they're buying, the cars that they're driving are being bought on the pain and peril of black people. That sounds just like fucking slavery to me. To this day and age. And so when you're looking at, I'll give you for instance. So recently I was doing a training and I was talking about historical trauma.
Right.
And I went through the slave code, several items on the slave code.
Sure.
I had people read it. Read this shit because we had to live this shit. You gonna read it. I had people read it.
Out loud?
Out loud. And then while my Black Americana was on the table, you got to look at Mammy and read this shit, okay? And so while they was reading it, I made a supposing that, I wonder, do you think any of your policies reflect the slave code? So the next session, we pulled out their policies and procedures. And we compared it to the slave code of 17 this and 16 that. And we found
What'd you find?
We found similarities as if some of the policies and procedures, like somebody had the slave code and wrote that shit down.
How did they respond?
They were kind of shocked. Like, I can't believe this is even a thing that we're doing this. And it's one thing to have a thought, a hypothesis about it.
But when you comparing them side by side,
when you comparing
that's
them
brilliant. You
side
made that
by,
up?
yes, I did. When you comparing it side by side, and I would like to take that to so many other organizations and look at your policies and imagine. So there again, I'm gonna come back to white people are carrying historic oppression, and it's in you. And if you don't check it, it's going to continue to dominate. And so,
regardless of how good people are, this is part of socialization.
it's part of you. Just like I didn't wake up, I wasn't born and said, I want to have high cortisol levels. I want to be pre-diabetic. I didn't wake up and do that. Some of the stuff was just
It's the water. It's the water you swim in. It's what King used to say. So listen, I'm not just doing this for black folks and people of color. This stuff is killing white people. This is oppressing white people.
Yeah.
And it keeps coming up in their children and their children's children.
Right.
So,
I mean, and you see that. I mean, even as much as we see crime and things fall out like it does in the United States, still, who are the serial killers? White men. Who are the mass murderers who are going into schools and movie theaters and shooting up people? White men and boys. So even as much shit we've been through, we ain't on that as black people.
right. But yet people want to talk about black on black crime
Right.
in Chicago.
Which is a
and DC.
misnomer.
Right.
Because most white people actually commit crime against each other and others. White men are like the only men who rape everybody.
Because typically rape happens within
Latinos
your culture.
rape Latinos, blacks rape blacks.
So this is your work. So this ain't just your observation. This is your work.
White men rape every damn body.
And that's very interesting. But yet we're called the predators.
Right.
And I talked to someone who works in this field and said that in the old days, when they would have either posters or materials about how do you view a post, how do you protect yourself against a rapist or sort of identify them, someone with a big white van, but they would use black men in some of the depiction. And the odds that a black man is going to rape a white woman is much less than her being raped by a white man.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
But yet here's some of the mindsets that we're animal-like, we're criminals, we're all these things, and so
right. And protect the white woman, put her on a pedestal, but the black woman can never be raped.
right.
The black woman could never be raped. So I'm gonna want to walk through something
Sure.
that I was just thinking about yesterday and today. So when we're looking at like the 70s, and I need to do some research on this,
Right.
okay? But you're looking at the 70s. That was kind of the height of, I'll say, affirmative action. Would you agree? 70s, early 80s.
Sure.
Okay.
Because it was challenged, but people understood. Yes.
So I need to look at the timeline, right? Parallel is when the thrust of welfare system
Right.
was going on.
Right. Mid-60s.
So these are two things that really kind of happening at parallel times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now let's look at the black woman who was receiving welfare.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, she couldn't have a TV. She couldn't even have some, like toaster ovens and things like that.
Right.
She couldn't have a car. She couldn't have a man.
Right.
She had to
He
prove
couldn't live there.
He couldn't live there. She had to prove that she was absolutely destitute
In order to get government.
in order to get some damn peanut butter in a can.
Mm-hmm.
You're not supposed to need a can opener to get to peanut butter.
Right.
She had to prove all this. Let's parallel the white woman during that same time period for affirmative action, which that is the biggest hoax, because we see usually a black man, because during that time more black men were getting jobs, right? At the same time, the white woman is being seen as the protected state of person who's being discriminated against. What did the white woman have to prove in order to get affirmative action?
That she was a woman.
And she was white. She didn't have to prove that she was poor, she was destitute, that she didn't have a car. She didn't have to prove that she was not married. She didn't have to prove that she wasn't in line for an inheritance. She didn't have to prove that she wasn't networked through her daddy.
She could benefit.
Be white and a woman.
And benefit from what black folks and people were doing for the rights of
and
oppressed
every
people.
Other thing of whiteness.
That's very interesting.
Yes.
That's very
Yes.
curious. And we
And
do
so
know, at looking at this, white women benefited coming out of that movement more than any of the other groups. Oh,
hell yeah. Well, they still had their cabin up north.
That's
and got an inheritance from their grandmother and still benefited from the slave labor of black people. And so when we look at, poverty levels even today and how poverty has impacted our mental health, our physical health, and everything that we're going through, our conditions in which we're living in, if we had an equal chance,
we could, yes.
Even in the 50s and 60s and the 70s.
Well, let me tell you this. No, you bring up a great point. Keep this in mind, that in the mid 60s, the black family was more intact than the white family. So this whole thing that you can't have a husband in the home, well, why would you need to do that if he wasn't in the home? I mean, think about this.
That was strategy to purposely break up the black family.
Why would you need to make that a stipulation if the man if he weren't there? And so what's happening is, while those things are going on, so then if there are more black people married and intact families, then why didn't the white women have to prove that? And why was that a condition for the black?
Peanut butter in a can.
See, these systemic things are here, and we got to be able to look at history and those.
And that's recent history.
Yeah, and that's recent history.
And impactful history.
Right. If that's not in the history of the folks who are listening to this show, it's in the lives of your parents.
Right. So this isn't just jobs. Right. White women got loans to start businesses. They got a whole lot of stuff.
And just like back with the suffrage movement, a lot of what happened to get the white women the right to vote was looking at people like Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, what they were doing about equal rights. And they were also pushing for women's rights as well. But keep in mind, while women were trying to vote in America in 1919, 1920, black men had already been voting, since the 1860s. And historically, we talked about this a couple of episodes ago, that even as white women were climbing, they were not practicing intersectionality and reaching out to the black sisters.
And they still are not, because I speak to all the good white women who are working in social services. When you go to staff meetings and you see a room full of other white women, and you see all the ones in leadership positions, who are the supervisors, who are the directors, are all white women.
Fundraisers. And
you don't say shit about it, you're part of the problem.
You are part of the problem.
You are the problem.
I'm glad you practiced that hypothesis here on Black Like Me. We might need you to come back after we do some research out there. So listen, did you finish your
yeah, that
was powerful.
Thank you.
So Lilada, listen, we're drawing from the resilience, and part of our resilience is being able to talk honestly about these things, because there's something somewhat implicit in our upbringing that nice black people who are doing well don't talk or speak angrily about these issues. And so part of our resilience is that we do speak up against it, because if we understood the extent to which these things are still going on and destroying us as a nation, is weakening our position in the world. We don't see ourselves as being able to be competitive with other world powers. Our GNP is jeopardized because we don't have enough people in the workforce, enough people moving up the chain and the ladders professionally. We got to understand the root of this. We're too busy to try to make up excuses.
Right.
But we share this to help really free white minds.
Right. And tear up the black card thing. Don't say shit to me about you bringing up the black card.
Right.
That's mythology. And I also, can I just throw in here too, when I said I won't ever forgive slavery, that's not that I'm expecting white people today to be responsible.
I hear you. I know that.
They're not responsible for that, but they're responsible for their shit today.
Right. That's very true.
And that's what they gotta fix.
Right. Right. And we have to keep saying it, otherwise they don't think it's big.
Right.
They just keep thinking,
good.
Right. And we're good. So I'm going to ask a black person what they think about something, but not my white friends, because they don't have these problems. We're still saying we're the only ones having these issues. Exactly. So I like that you clarified it, but I knew what you meant. This thing is real. And so a part of our resilience is we're going to keep wearing our dashikis. We're going to keep talking truth. We're not going to be maligned because we're knowledgeable and we're smart and we're vocal, and we've created platforms. Because some of this stuff you can't say through mainstream media because it's going to offend people.
Right.
But where has change really happened? I mean, did the settlers of the U.S. worry about offending the Native Americans? Did they worry about offending the crown?
They didn't worry about offending God with the shit they was doing.
They didn't worry about offending the Pope. And so they did it because they felt that it was their right. So when we exercise that same sense of, let's just use for the lack of a better word, that American spirit of rugged individualism, where we're standing for what's right and speaking against injustice, why are we marginalized and angry? So anyway, I won't even get into all of that. That's another show. But what I'm saying is today, we're landing on resilience. We know enough. We know where we have come from. We've stood on both shores of the big pond. We knew who and where we were received, and we knew where we took off from. And one of the things I say in one of my 3 poems that are just released on AlexG.com is this: for white folks who tell us to go home if we don't like it, let me tell you something. We were standing on what would become America when you arrived.
Right.
We were speaking English when you arrived with European.
This is more our home
accent.
than it is even yours.
We helped Joe babies. We helped America begin, and we nursed Joe babies. We helped America become the capitalistic superpower that now screws us and calls us lazy and go back to Liberia someplace if you don't like it. And so our resilience is that we know how to go in black space like Africa and draw strength. And we also know how to come back home to white space like America and say, we got to get it together. Hold it accountable, because that's part of the legacy we bring to this country. Because there's so many reasons why we could be set off and against it. And you and I both, but we are actually helping to help America regain its soul, just like we helped America rethink what faith was. Because what they're promoting across the world, that was not honoring to my Jesus. That was not honoring. The stuff you put into it, power and deceit, y'all twisted stuff so that it looked like the same shit you were running from with the state church and the crown in Britain. And so now you bring it on an even different level and put your own twist on it. So our resistance allows us to stand and stand strong and to speak truth and to embody the sense of resilience. And if the past 400 years have not destroyed us, then your mean looks and your attitudes and your responses and your mean tweets aren't going to stop us anyway, because we're free.
Right.
We're trying to get y'all free.
Right.
We're trying to get y'all free. And the irony of that is very, very interesting. So, and we ain't got no Stockholm syndrome. No. We are not in love with the systems that are we are not beholden nor tethered to them. We have our own identity. So you got to get yours. And part of it is by understanding this history. So listen, this was a big one. This was heavy duty. And, Lilada, I know you're working right now on getting your own show and your own podcast. When you're ready to do that, in the near future, I want to have you come on and talk about it a little more, because I think your brilliance and your passion and your integrity and your ability to not step down from truth, because you're more convinced that it will help people than hurt them. That's really, really powerful. So just know we want to help you to launch. Let me just say this for just a minute. Someone came up to me yesterday and said, your sister is putting art out on Facebook. Is she drawing that? Because I think people just thought you found some artists and you're just helping to promote. I said, no, Lilada's been drawing as long as she's been walking almost. And so Eli and my team are going to put a link inside the episode. And so you don't even have to worry about quoting it, because they're going to have a link that's right there. But you got a store on Society 6. You're putting stuff up on Facebook. You're creating T-shirts and mugs and shams and window coverings and blankets. I'm serious. Yeah. Tote bags. I mean, you got your own store. So at some point, I want you to come back and talk about more of that. But would it be okay with you if we put a link to your store? Absolutely. And a link to your artwork? Because recently someone bought some artwork from you. So grandmother bought it for her grandchild, and she said, look, Nana, she drew me. So young black girls are seeing what you didn't see. Was someone who looked like you. And I remember even when you were a kid, you wanted, I can't remember, what's her name, Kimmy? What's the black Barbie doll? Christy. That was important to you. That even though,
I found my old Christy Barbie doll.
You found her?
Yes.
Oh, you need to use that with your Americana.
She got an afro.
Yes. Oh, see, I'm talking about this one. So I'm just saying, I'm just really appreciative, because this is something to bring healing to folks. And I love that black, white, Latino folks are buying your art, because there's something very healing and fresh about it. So folks, as you're listening, There's going to be a link here. Click it and take a look at her heart and at her art and her heart. But yes, yes, white people, you can buy a mug with black people on it. Listen, we've worn shirts with y'all on it.
Come on now.
We've had toys with y'all on it.
Right.
You know, G.I. Joe looks like you, Barbie. It's okay. So I'm just saying, we're giving permission. Those folks,
yes,
they can do that because
absolutely.
Bring some culture up in your place. Listen, y'all. This has been another great episode of Black Like Me. I've been sitting here with my sister, Lilada Gee, and we're talking about a plethora of things, but what Ghana means to us. And Lilada, I keep saying I feel bubble wrapped. I feel like I can fight more and push more because I'm understanding that it's incumbent upon us who have stood on both shores. Now, our ancestors did, but they didn't go back and forth. They didn't have the resources. It is incumbent upon our generation as educated, enlightened, heart-filled African-American folks who have stood on both shores and who understand the opportunity to honor our folks who fought so hard for us to be here, to be sane and to be well, to live that out fully. So listen, folks, as always, listen, learn, change, and share. Share this episode because you know someone in social services, you know someone who will anger, send it to them. That's all right.
Right.
You know, that's all right. It'll help folks. But you said people need a black friend. They need a black female friend in their life. You all need to hear some truth about how we see things. So listen and learn. I want to thank Corey Saffold for creating the music for this podcast, my podcast manager, Tyler Nyland, engineer and editor, Eli Steenlich, my editor, Jeremy Holiday, and a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.
Ooh, Black Like Me.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex Gee's amazing work at www.alexgee.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.
Ooh, Black Like Me.